feel like seeing people hurt and not understanding the ways that they hurt and not knowing what to do about the ways that they hurt and just allowing themselves to stay in that affected me way more than all the fights that I've been in, all the times that I've been threatened, and even the times that I've been shot at.
Mm-hmm.
Seeing people hurt was way worse than any of that.
Hello, welcome to Stomp Podcast, the place where I try to stomp out the supposed gap between us and the lives of those around us. Now, take a moment to immerse in the setting of today's conversation with my guest, Joe. We are in a courtyard in the middle of the building. It's kind of like the walls are a donut and there's just a hole piercing through the middle of the building. And you could hear the birds chirping, maybe some music. I didn't know the building had a music room. And the leaves that I step on now. Joe, can you tell the audience a bit about who you are?
Yeah, so currently I'm a student at UC Berkeley. I'm a re-entry student, so my path to get here has been a little unorthodox. A little bit older than everybody else, but still appreciate the opportunity to be here. Spent most of my early years right outside of high school, straight to work, and so I was really just trying to build a career out there. I never really thought about school as an opportunity for me. So I'm really overall just very thankful and blessed to be here. I feel like it's a really big opportunity for me, so I'm trying to trying to make the most of it while I can.
And you mentioned the term re-entry. Can you specify what that means?
Yeah, so it's any student who takes longer than a 5-year gap between high school and college, or their first stint in college and a second stint. So I've had that. I think I had exactly a 5-year gap from the first attempt at college I had when I dropped out and everything, and just decided to work. And now where I've transferred here from a community college and trying to pursue law school.
When people grow out of adolescence, they may end up going to college, become incarcerated, or join the workforce. At the time, what made you decide to join the workforce?
I just had spent so much time in school, and I was pretty good at it, especially like middle school, elementary school. In high school, I still did really well. I graduated in the top 10 percentile of my high school,
Oh,
but
wow.
I just never felt like school was really the path for me. I got a lot more enjoyment from engagement and working than I did in school, and I felt like in the classroom, at least, I didn't really feel that fulfilled. And I started working illegally when I was 13 because I had lied about my age. I worked at a gas station, so I've been working ever since I was 13, and I just have always really liked it. So I just thought that work was more for me than school was.
So, the way I'm hearing this, it seems like school was more of a had to go there because it was the law. And what was how was learning presented to you? Because you mentioned really needing to feel engaged and your work bringing that for you. So compared to that, how was learning or the soft or hard skills you had while at school presented?
So For me, I think learning has always kind of come naturally. I've always had an interest in learning, but towards the end of high school, I felt like I got so tired of like just being oversaturated with like a lot of the same information just over and over again. Because it's like how many ways can they teach you to write an essay, right? I've been learning how to write like an essay since I was in 5th grade,
Yeah.
and it never really changed. You write more and more and more.
Mm-hmm.
Or math, like obviously, yeah, you math I guess was a little bit different because you learn and you progress, but at the same time, it's kind of just like, how many more formulas can I learn? How many times can I, utilize the Pythagorean theorem and like my algebraic homework and stuff like that? It just got so repetitive, and I just was kind of tired of. I definitely needed a break, and I think it was really good for me to take one because I think I was just so bored with learning, and I could always do it. I could always succeed in school, but around the end of high school, when I saw a life like without school, I really kind of gravitated towards it because I was just so burnt out.
Mm-hmm. Can you tell me how would you describe this life without school?
I feel like there's a lot to learn about life that only comes from outside the classroom.
Mm-hmm.
And the classroom teaches you a lot of really practical, useful skills, but you can only learn how to live by living. And for me, going straight to the workforce and even just, like one thing in school that I always remembered being weird is that we never really got to work together. Like, and they would tell us all the time, oh, like in the real world, you're not really gonna be able to have somebody there to do your work for you or anything like that. So you gotta sit down and do this test alone. You gotta do your work alone. But in the real world, it's completely counter to that because you always have people there to work with you if you want it.
Yeah.
And there are people that want to succeed alone, and they do, but I think it's because they're taught to do that, But in that way, I think like all these geniuses and stuff that like really like to work alone kind of contribute to like the conflict of the world because nobody is willing to work together and nobody wants to work together because they've been taught to work alone. I think the workforce teaches you something that's completely the opposite of that. Like you are always working with a group of people, always. And like you're hardly ever really working alone, even when you're doing a solo task. And I think that really taught me how to integrate myself and work with others. So that was definitely like in direct opposition to what I've like had learned in school.
Mm-hmm. Do you feel then that it is innate for humans to interact with each other?
Yeah, I think especially like, and this is like why society is a double-edged sword. It's
Okay.
because, being in society means that you're in a system that is codependent on the lives of others and the opinions of others and the feelings of others. So when you ignore that and when you can't see past your own nose and you think so selfishly, that's the only thing that creates conflict, especially like, on a political scale, on a global scale. It's like just having these uncompromising selfish ideas. It's really detrimental, I think, to humanity, especially when we live in societies that are just so interconnected with people that, there's really the only way to not live with people is to live outside of society, which I don't think anyone really wants.
Mm-hmm. So it sounds like you really are drawn to the human connection. And you had mentioned that you had gone to college and then dropped out, and that was before you had entered the workforce. So at the time, what was really that decision to not continue the college at the time?
So actually, I was set to go to CSU Long Beach.
Okay.
That was kind of like my dream school, and it was on the docket for me. I got a scholarship for baseball, and as it got closer, I just kept getting like really anxious, I guess. Like I just really felt like I wasn't cut out for it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I decided to kind of step back, and I went to community college instead and stayed in my hometown. But at the same time, obviously, I was still working. And
Yeah.
I was working for the local newspaper, actually. I was writing freelance.
Okay.
And I was also working for an after-school program. And at the same time, I tried community college, but I just was really unmotivated. And I just, again, this is where I really thought, like, okay, like, I'm in college now, but I'm still learning. Like I said, I just go back to it because this was the one thing that I was thinking about specifically in my English class. It's like I'm still learning again how to write an essay.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like I said, I've been doing this since 5th grade, and I was like, I'm not going to grow here. And I didn't really even consider that maybe it was just community college. I didn't really like think, okay, once I finish my undergrad stuff, it'll be different.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll be more challenged in something that I'm passionate about. But at the same time, too, I couldn't decide on a major. I couldn't decide on one field of study I wanted to do.
Mm-hmm.
And so I ended up just dropping out and staying with the jobs that I had and really finding my passion there.
Well, it looks now that the thing you're studying is people. So it seems like people is the thing that you're really interested in. Then how does the experience or feeling of being in college back then compare to now?
So now I think that I've definitely found my passion, but I found it in work. It's like I said, I've been working for years, and I was constantly like growing in my work or finding new, better opportunities.
Mm-hmm.
So I stayed working freelance for a while, but then I started working less and less as I got like more demanding jobs. I graduated from working at an after-school program to being a full-time tutor at a middle school. And there, like, I really just saw firsthand how disadvantaged so many kids were. And I grew up with a very underprivileged household and like life circumstances.
Mm-hmm.
But I always kind of, like considered myself to be like an outlier. Like I'm like, nobody really has it this tough. And I was able to get through it and everything like that. But seeing younger kids deal with a lot of the same stuff that I had to deal with, like single income households, unemployed moms living on welfare, like drug addicted families, disjointed families, not being able to live with your siblings, or sometimes having to take care of your siblings because your parents aren't really there. Seeing other kids deal with that kind of broke my heart, and then that kind of drove me to be more than a tutor for these kids. And I really was starting to become more of like a role model. I started coaching baseball and football there, and really like interacting with the kids and trying to be as positive as an experience and influence as I could be, because I know that they didn't really have that. And so it was really there in seeing disadvantaged youth like everywhere, and seeing these kids deal with everything that you could think of. It's so unimaginable to have that like on a 12-year-old's shoulders, So I just try to give them like as much respite as possible by not being like one of those mean school staff members, not being someone that's like trying to push them, but trying to encourage them, and that's when I really really felt like I wanted to make a difference in my community, in that immediate community at first. So then I started like, finding other organizations to volunteer with and organizations to work for. Then I can't remember what year it was, but the Uvalde school shooting happened, and I remember being just like completely heartbroken. I don't know what it was about that school shooting, but I'd been working in the school for a while now, and I really just started thinking like, what if that happened here, Like, what if that happened to these kids that I know?
Yeah.
And then that kind of opened my perspective from like my own community to like just the entire world, right? And so that day, I would say maybe like the next day, I signed up for the police academy because, like, I do believe that that school shooting could have been lessened, and I think everybody kind of acknowledges that there's a failure in the police department to act,
Mm-hmm.
and obviously it's tough with the political climates around police work, but it was that school shooting, and having worked with all these kids and worked with youth and communities around mine, that really made me want to become like a protector, like a guardian.
Mm-hmm.
And so I signed up for the police force. Signed up for the police academy, graduated, and worked for like my local police department for a while.
And how old were you when that happened?
I was 22.
22 years old.
22 years old.
And you had mentioned that going into the academy, you were had the perception of a kind of failure in the police system.
Yeah.
So while at the academy, what were your expectations of what police work would be like for you?
So again, I'll use the word guardian again. I really wanted to be that, like to be a protector.
Mm-hmm.
And so the failure of police work is sort of like this militarization of it.
Okay.
And in that, police are not guardians so much as they are warriors. And don't get me wrong, like I worked with really great people. Even beforehand, I didn't have a negative perception of police. I still don't.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that that's sort of unpopular in like highly political situations. A lot of people like demonize the police.
Mm-hmm.
But at the end of the day, the institution is there to protect people, to serve and to protect.
Mm-hmm.
The failure comes with when people bring personal influence into police work. And I did see a fair share of that. People who were just so hardened by the job, people so disgusted by always having to see the underbelly of humanity, by having to always deal with the worst possible situations. When you deal with that for 10 hours a day, it really impacts the way that you view society, and so it gives a lot of police a negative perception on society. That said, there's still great police, there's still great men and women in the police force who are always really trying to do the right thing, but at the same time, it does kind of harden your perception of the world. I wanted to join the police to not only change the attitude of the police officers, but also to change the attitude of people outside of police work.
Mm-hmm.
And what their opinions of police work were. Because I thought that, it was at this time where like ACAB was popular, and, a lot of people, I feel like there was this really weird war between Black Lives Matter and cops, especially with like the whole installation of Blue Lives Matter, which was in direct opposition to Black Lives Matter,
Mm-hmm.
really. And I was like, this conflict should not exist. Like an attacked group of people, and the people that are supposed to protect everyone
Mm-hmm.
should not be in conflict.
Mm-hmm.
That should never have been a thing. And so obviously I just saw like a huge disparity in what police work should be and what it was, and how it should be viewed, and how it was viewed. So I really wanted to be a part of the change in that. So that's what really drove me to. That was my desire in joining the police force.
Then how did it change you too? Because you had mentioned that other people maybe became really hardened or disillusioned. So did you ever slip into maybe a more negative perception of the world, and maybe feeling dejected in what you had come in to do?
Yeah, definitely, because you show up on calls a lot of times and you're not wanted there, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
So, you're still human at the end of the day, and you remember as much as possible that, like, yeah, these guys are just mad that I'm wearing a uniform, but sometimes you can't help but have your heart out there, you know, especially when you go into really sensitive areas already. Like, so for example, I grew up and my mom always had like the worst boyfriends, and they always abused her, you know. So every time I went to a DV call, I went in like emotionally charged. As much as I didn't want to be, I could only think like these are the same kind of guys that, you know, would beat up on my mom when I was a kid, and I could only helplessly watch. And my mom would never press charges against these guys, and like it was always our neighbors who called the cops. It was never her. And then when I was a cop, it was the same thing. You'd show up on calls, and it's like show up to a woman who was getting beat on by her partner, and it wasn't her that called, you know. It was the neighbors, a concerned family member, someone. Sometimes the kids, sometimes her own kids would call, you know. You respond, and she doesn't really want to do anything like press charges, and it's out of your hands. It's hard not to become disgusted with situations like that. It's hard not to take that feeling home, and like it really just started to weigh on me after a while. And that's just like a small example, you know. I feel like seeing people hurt and not understanding the ways that they hurt and not knowing what to do about the ways that they hurt and just allowing themselves to stay in that affected me way more than all the fights that I've been in, all the times that I've been threatened, and even the times that I've been shot at. Seeing people hurt was way worse than any of that.
And how did you end
around underprivileged youth, in like sort of skateboard distribution and funding for those skateboards, to give kids like an outlet to you know, really express themselves in skating, which is something I grew up doing. And so I was able to share like a positive outlet that I loved with underprivileged youth. Just give out skateboards with a group of guys that started this organization specifically for that. I volunteered for an adaptive sports program for developmentally disabled youth and adults. So I coached there as well. I coached basketball and baseball for these developmentally disabled people, and giving them an opportunity that like they never had before. The guy that created it, he was, you know, just a genius, and I think that his heart drove him even more than his mind, because he would come up with ways for people in a wheelchair to hit a baseball, or people with cerebral palsy hit a baseball. You know, he'd come up with like these little gadgets that he made himself, like on pulleys, for them to pull a bat and you know, would spring it and hit a ball off a tee. And every single time, like these people would light up. Same with the skateboard situation. Every time we gave a skateboard to one of these kids, like their eyes would just light up, and it was like that. It was the complete opposite of seeing the fire extinguish in someone's eyes when they're sad. So working with organizations like this, and another one I worked with that it taught pottery techniques to foster youth.
Oh wow.
And it was just like a creative outlet, creative safe space for these kids that didn't really have anything, you know?
Yeah.
And like these organizations all were like completely seeing happiness as opposed to seeing sadness. That's how I dealt with it. I would just throw myself into these organizations.
And you had mentioned the internalization of that hurt. So do you think directing all your energy into this community service was kind of a way to mediate for, if, I don't know if guilt is the right word?
Yeah, definitely it was. And it was sort of guilt, because there was this feeling that I always had that I was like never able to do enough, you know, that a lot of the stuff that we did was like a half measure when we responded to calls. And you know that these situations people are in are just going to happen again, you know? So then that's kind of when I realized like the failure is also in the justice system entirely, and the failure is in politics and rules and laws and government. And so, I wanted to help on a bigger scale, and that's actually what drove me to go back to school, pursue law, pursue a career in politics. It was that I wanted to help in a bigger way, and it was like there's this saying that I think of a lot: part the weeds and examine the soil. And I think as a police officer, I was pulling weeds, but now I want to have the opportunity to examine the soil, see what's really wrong, what's causing these weeds to sprout, and preventing it on a different scale, in a more like institutionalized way, not just being a band-aid but a cure.
And you mentioned law and politics, so this is something that you're studying currently?
Yeah, and so I'm studying law, studying politics. I got my AA. I have 4 AAs that I got from my community college in political science, social science, sociology, and administration of justice. And my thinking behind that is I think that the world of law needs more sociologists. And I kind of am approaching law school with a different approach. I want to become an attorney and like work my way up, obviously, but not to maintain the status quo, not to be a part of the system that's already there. I think that it's extremely sad that Lady Justice, the pillar of law, the figure of law, is blinded. And I think that I'm going into this with this desire to like rip the blindfold off of Lady Justice so that she could see the lives and how they're affected, all the people that she rules over, how she affects them, because I understand like what the intention is behind blinding justice, but I don't think that it works in practice. I think that, people in law need to really see how law is affecting the people around them, the people that law was actually designed for. I think that, law and government like are really the same thing, right? And right now it almost feels like law and government are made for the people that rule them, people that are in charge of government, the people that are in charge of laws. But it's not like that. Government and law was always supposed to be for and by the people, and I think that shift needs to happen again, where we shift back to the ideals that sprouted law and government in the first place.
And considering your background, you were able to see that firsthand, and it kind of sounds like a reverse pipeline, because usually in the college environment, I've heard a lot of people directly going to a 4-year college and then applying for grad school and identifying as a pre-law student. But for you first joined the workforce and you dealt with these issues firsthand and saw the people who were suffering and then chose to pursue law. And that, I think, is a really unique quality. I do have a question for what you mentioned about going into law and contributing to a change in the system, because you had also mentioned something similar about the police system.
Right.
So I'm kind of looking at parallels here. At the time when you had decided that you wanted a change in the police system, what had you done that might have been different than people around you, or did you end up kind of blending in with everyone else? And I guess the second question is, how does that compare to now, where you also want to change a system?
So I think I realized that even when I went into police work, as much as I could be a positive influence, as much as I could be like the good cop, because there's a lot of that good cop, bad cop. Like, yeah, a lot of people take their really strong attitudes into their police work, and in a lot of ways it's effective. You get the job done. But there's like more of this warm body policing that I took to be like my core value of my police work. treating everybody as a human in a unique circumstance, even though a lot of the calls sound, even though you give a code to every single call, they're not the same call, you know?
Yeah.
And remembering that, that's the way that I at least made a difference. I just try to make small impacts.
Yeah.
But while working in law, and even in the few short years that I worked as a police officer, there were so many changes to the way that we were policing.
Mm-hmm.
And that was all in response to like the political climate, obviously. But I started to realize, you know, like as much as I really wanted to make a difference, then I was still a cog. Like I was still just a small piece that really didn't have much say in the way things are run, in the way things are perceived. And I realized, obviously, like you're a part of the machine. You're not the person who designs it, right?
Yeah.
And these people who designed the machine were never even part of it, and they were never even part of the community that the machine serves. Because maybe it is because they went straight to a 4-year college, and they graduated and started working in prestigious jobs already, and they were so apart from like the underprivileged community that they never really stopped to see what they're actually doing, you know?
Everything that you've mentioned so far, I'm seeing this theme of self versus system. Like, for example, when you were working at the school, each individual teacher's attitude versus maybe their negative emotions as a whole, or how each police interacted or reacted to their work versus that trend happening to the group as a whole.
Right.
And also here when you mention law. So to what degree do you think this is a systemic issue, and how much is it can a person really change their attitude toward what they're doing? As what you mentioned about you know, each call is different, and even when you were talking about working at the school, you try to treat the kids in a positive light.
So I think that a lot of the issues I see are systemic, you know, and I think that true change is going to have to come from the bottom up.
Okay.
But I come from a place where everyone actually has sort of a defeatist attitude towards politics. Everyone is so disinclined to vote because they think that their voice won't make a difference.
Mm-hmm.
So if, like, going back to what I said earlier, all these people, these enforcers of government, these enforcers of, or not the enforcers of law, but the creators of law, like these people at the top don't understand anything about the people on the bottom. But the people on the bottom is who law and government is for, right? But if these people at the bottom feel like their voice isn't heard, then they're silenced, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And the worst thing in the world are words left unspoken. So there's all these people with all these feelings, all these concerns, all these different thoughts and ideas who never get to voice them because they feel like their voice is silenced by the top few, you know, who we have to hear spewing BS over and over and over again, stuff that has nothing to do with us, stuff that doesn't address any of our real issues, any of our real problems, and they're just touting nonsense to get elected, you know,
Mm-hmm.
to maintain their position of power. And I think, you know, what good is power if you're not going to use it in the right way? If you're not going to help people, who are you really helping? You're helping yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So then the system just remains in place, and it's in every position that I've been in law, in education, in politics. There's a system that doesn't want to be changed, but it should, and it should be challenged, but it can only be challenged by the bottom, the majority. So they really have to feel like they have a voice, you know?
And our time is coming to an end, so I wanted to end this episode by asking, is there anything that I have not asked that you want to mention?
Anything that I have I would just think that, you know, I haven't done it yet, but I'm on the track to doing something that, like, a lot of people in my life didn't really think possible, you know? Small town kid trying to make a big difference, right?
Yeah.
Um, so I would just like to say, for anybody who would hear or anyone who would listen, is that you could really do whatever you want to do. And I would just hope that you want to do some good, you know, and do whatever it takes to do it.
If I could respond in all caps, I would say it louder. That is a really great message, and it was so great having you as a guest today. Um, the insight you gave us and the things you said were very inspiring. I might actually collect a lot of the quotes you said and just put them in description just so people could look back on it. And thank you so much for spending your time today
Yeah.
to do this.
Thank you for having me.